Well, whether we're having a conversation about the state of St. Louis or its future, one issue that always seems to come up is crime. Tonight, from police chiefs to your voice, we hope to have a very frank conversation about what we are doing to make our region safer. And on Stay Tuned, you drive the discussion. We bring local experts, journalists, and civic leaders together to have tough conversations for a stronger St. Louis. Tweet us your insights on tonight's topic, and you've got a seat at the table. With a few national experts and a panel of community members, this is the show bringing more light and less heat to the issues that matter. So stay tuned. We're starting off our conversation tonight with Rick Rosenfeld with University of Missouri St. Louis. You're a professor there, but you also have a very close relationship, a formal relationship with the City of St. Louis Police Department. Your official title at UMSL, Founders Professor of Criminology and Criminal Justice, University of Missouri St. Louis. I want to ask you, well, you know, if ever there was a time when we wish our show wasn't timely, it would be tonight, but it kind of seems like it is. I believe we had 3 calls for shootings in the city today. We've had at least a half dozen or so in the past week or so. Is something going on here? Is this statistically different than this time, say, last year, or is this a figment of our media attention right now?
A little of both. There has been an uptick, certainly in homicides in the city to this point this year compared with last year. Something of an uptick, but I don't think we should make too much out of these relatively short-run trends. Anytime there's a shooting, anytime there's a homicide, it's obviously an important event, and not just the police department, but the community needs to be aware of it and to respond to it. But generally speaking, crime in St. Louis is down this year over last year, down this year over 5 years ago, down by more than half now compared to the early 1990s. So does St. Louis have a crime problem? Yes. Is the police department addressing it effectively? I think so, yes. And is the crime problem moving in the right direction? In other words, are we seeing crime rates decline over time? We are.
I want to ask you more about maybe the perception of these statistics you're talking about. I had the privilege of starting the day in a talk about entrepreneurship. Jim McKelvey, co-founder of Square, talking to a room full of business leaders about venture capital and other phrases they toss around in the tech and startup world. And the number one thing on his mind, crime stats in the city and region of St. Louis. He says, forget the politics, merge the city and county for the crime stats alone. Is that something that's of some value? We hear people talk about that.
I think so. Crime doesn't respect the city-county border. So persons who from St. Louis County or elsewhere in the region who are in the city can become the victim of a crime. St. Louis City residents are crime victims outside of the city elsewhere in the region. Crime certainly doesn't respect that border, nor should our crime statistics, in my view.
Okay, so people are talking about that very issue, and you've got Washington University students making videos about it. But what beyond the statistics do you wish that people knew that maybe isn't in this conversation?
Well, 2 things. First of all, that the overall trends are positive. Secondly, that the city police department, and later I think you'll hear about the county as well, but the city police department is engaged, in my view, in very effective strategies to reduce crime. Part of my job is to evaluate the effectiveness of those strategies, and what we found thus far is that the so-called hotspot strategies, where police are deployed to areas where crime is spiked or where it's heavily concentrated, those strategies work to reduce crime. It's a police department in which Lots of officers will not be added in the near future. Budget is tight, and so it's a department that has to juggle a lot, keep a lot of balls in the air. But that strategy, the so-called hotspot strategy, in my view, is being applied effectively by the city police department. I'm not certain that's widely known.
But when you Google St. Louis, crime stats
Right.
still pop up pretty high up there.
Right. St. Louis has two problems in that respect. Like all big cities, we have a crime problem, and we have to address that problem. We also have a crime statistic problem, and that's a little bit different. Our crime statistic problem has to do with the fact that we are a very, very tightly drawn central city, 76 square miles, in a metropolitan area of 2 million. And the city residents comprise only about 11% of the metropolitan area population. So to become a crime victim in the city of St. Louis, all you have to do is become a victim in the city. That's the numerator of the crime rate, the top part of the fraction. The bottom part is the city population. The city population is relatively small, certainly compared to the potential pool of victims from all around the region. That gives us a crime rate that is artificially higher than it would be in other cities, even cities much like ours, like Memphis. Memphis comprises a little over half of its metropolitan area. So we are, in some sense, disadvantaged by that geographic issue, and that's one area in which a city-county quote-unquote merger, at least with respect to crime statistics, could help a lot with our crime statistics problem. We do also have a genuine crime problem. I think it's important not to confuse the two. It's the crime statistics problem, unfortunately, that drives some of the negative perceptions, and some of those perceptions, I think, are baseless.
Rick Rosenfeld, thank you for your time, University of Missouri St. Louis. We appreciate you being here. Stick around. We will come back to you later in the show. Coming up, we're going to be talking to police chiefs from both St. Louis City and County. But first, let's hear what you are already saying. You can join this conversation online with the hashtag Stay Tuned STL. Well, I would say we were here at the table with the top criminal minds in the region, but I think that phrase means something else. So we will just say the top minds on the topic of crime. How about that? Leading the effort that we're talking about tonight. I'll start with introductions from St. Louis County. Newly Chief John Belmar, Chief of St. Louis County Police Department. Colonel Sam Dodson, Chief Sam Dodson, St. Louis Police Department, the City Police Department, and his predecessor, former Chief Dan Isom, now the E. Desmond Lee Professor of Policing and Community Department of Criminology and Criminal Justice at the University of Missouri St. Louis. Okay, let me just start first by saying to the now City Chief, what maybe do you wish the former chief might have told you before you took this job, and maybe what you might tell the new chief at the table?
Well, we actually had a great conversation, right before Chief Isom left, and he said, trust your instincts. He said, it's your responsibility to make sure the department responds to crime, and trust your instincts, and I do that every day. My commanders tell me lots of things, but at the end of the day, I want to make sure we do the right things to keep the people in St. Louis safe.
What do people not know? What would you like people to know about your jobs and your officers' jobs on the street? What do you think the most unknown part of the job is to the general public?
Well, we actually try to be as open and as transparent, but I think the public needs to know that every day our officers come to work with the best intentions to try and keep the community safe and to leave the place a little bit better than we found it in the morning. And I think we do that more days than not. You heard Professor Rosenfeld talk about some of the successes that the police department, the Metropolitan Police Department in St. Louis have had over the last couple of years. Crime is down since 2006 over 50%. That's because of the hard work of the men and women of the police department. You talked about the perception. Crime is down, and it's because of their hard work.
But we've got a lot of, maybe from the outside looking in now, I mean, we've got several shootings in the last few days. This is a social media world we live in. People are talking about this. People are upset. We got communities, neighborhoods in pain. What is it that's going on right now in our region, do you see?
Well, there are short trends in which you have crime problems within any community. But one thing I say is that most people suffer from recency bias, right? They see what's happening in the news every day in the 24-hour media cycle, and that's what they take away in terms of what's going on in crime. But there's a whole history of what's happened in the past, and it's undeniable when you look at the crime statistics that crime has been trending down for several years now. And if you look at it in comparison to the years where crime was up significantly, like 1993, there's just a dramatic decrease in crime across the board in all communities.
Why do you think that is, as a professor, as law enforcement leaders? Why do we see this?
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Chief.
You know, we look at a lot of different things, and some of it, I think, is counterintuitive at times. But, you know, we talk about 1993. It's funny. My 1993 numbers mirror that of probably what St. Louis is. It was a bad year for us all across the board, especially in Part 1 crimes. So
what does that mean?
So that's the UCR Part 1. That's the homicides, the rapes, the assaults,
The
etc.
violent crimes.
So we take a look at our juvenile population, and they've decreased over since 1990 by about 7%. So there's a thought out there that our young people, ages perhaps 17 to 35, commit most of our crimes. We've seen that. We have a lot of violent offenders incarcerated now. Does that make a difference with us? And I think we talked about it, Chief Dotson did, and I know this was practiced when Chief Eisen was in the city, but we do a much better job identifying crime trends and acting upon those crime trends immediately. And if you don't recognize them and act on them immediately, then you can't make a difference in those trends, because sometimes those trends, they're short-lived, but they have a dramatic effect on crime. And then we see these reported, and oftentimes they're reported and it's very salacious. So that impacts how safe people feel in their community. So I think those things are very good. I think the hotspot model is something that we're really on to right now.
I know hotspot, this is something you've been talking about. Can you just give us a up-to-date on what that is? I mean, people may not be quite familiar. The professor mentioned it, but.
Well, and to kind of what Chief Elmore said, really technology, hotspot policing is the wave of the future for law enforcement. It used to be anecdote drove our enforcement strategies. Now we have real-time data that shows us where the hotspots are, where the crimes are occurring, the times of day, days of the week, and we're able to put resources into those areas to address the crime. And hotspot policing is giving away to microspot policing, which is an even a smaller version, even block by block sometimes of where crimes are occurring. And then the natural offshoot from that is hot people. The people that we know that are responsible for the crimes, to target them and to arrest them and bring them in front of the courts.
That seems a little bit like something out of a movie. Where are we getting some pushback from people here? I mean, that might seem like some people are feeling targeted in that sense there.
Well, I mean, the reality is that the technology has allowed us to respond more rapidly to crime and crime trends. And so people should be reassured that police departments are using this technology to make them safer. You know, years ago, you'd have to take out pens and look at maps and put them up, and you could imagine how long that would take to map out the trends in a neighborhood. But now you could virtually do it within hours, looking at changes in trends and getting your officers out there on the street in those hot spots so you can affect crime.
Does all the city and the county, do you get the same attention then everywhere? I mean, if something happens down here in the Central West End, that gets a lot of attention, and it gets perhaps a lot of response, maybe not so much in other areas, some people might say. What would you say to that, Chief?
Well, I think the attention comes from the media. We address all crime, whether it occurs in any part of the city, wherever it occurs, the same. That's really the reason for our redistricting, to put resources, the same number of resources in each area, each district that has the same number of calls for service, essentially, in the same amount of crime. So the media is the one that highlights the crime, not the police department, because we address it all the same.
Things are much easier in the county, though. No, it's a cake job you just got, I'm sure.
Right, but that's very true, and that's frustrating from time to time, because Chief Dotson hit the nail on the head. We address all crime same, and we will find, for example, that oftentimes a victim who happens to be a young African-American man, there's doesn't seem to be a hue and a cry, and it's not reported, and people don't see it. But yes, something similar to that happens in a more affluent area, and it's a gigantic big deal. Well, for the police department, we don't draw a difference. We don't draw a distinction. The bottom line is we put our assets where they need to be based on the call volume, and we move forward from there with it. So that can be frustrating from time to time on that illusion that is given to us oftentimes, and really it's fed by the media on what they feel like that people want to see and want to digest.
We won't leave that hanging. We have someone to address that very issue later in the show. I won't try to speak for the media in general. I put it to the city chief. I'll put it to the county chief. What do you wish people knew about the challenges, I should say, that your officers are up against?
Well, you know, they're very busy. We don't have a problem on the St. Louis County Police Department, or any chief in the United States will tell you that money couldn't solve. But at the end of the day, we try to do a very good job with the tools that we have. So the police officers out there are doing the best job that they possibly can with the resources given to them. I feel like they have a lot of support from the community at times. But what I would like to tell people is that when we see these little vignettes that are shown to us through YouTube or different things like that of violent encounters between police and subjects out there, that's just one small moment in time. And at the end of the day, part of what we do in police work can be very violent at times, and it's not fun for anybody. But I think people get an incorrect impression of what we do by just not being able to see everything in its proper characterization.
Chief, what can you say wearing a suit that you couldn't say in a uniform that you'd like people to know about this profession?
Well, I mean, even from the outside, I've become even more impressed with the policing profession because you're able to see it as a citizen. And one thing that you see, every police officer comes into an organization wanting to help people. And I see that really every day now as a civilian, right? That I see the police out there working very hard to protect the community every day. And so that's become even more apparent now as a regular civilian now.
Thank you all for your time. I appreciate it very much. Thanks. Full disclosure on our next guest, who's going to answer for some of the charges we just heard there. He gave me my first job in television TV station. I'd like to welcome Stacy Woelfel via Google Plus, Google Hangout. Thanks for coming to us from Columbia, Missouri, and the University of Missouri-Columbia, the School of Journalism. What do you say to that? Were you able to hear the chiefs? Do you think what is the role that, let's just stick to your area of expertise, TV. What role does a TV newsroom play in this current conversation and how things maybe are perceived in communities?
Yeah, television has a role to shine a light on how the police are doing their job, what sort of trends we're seeing in crime in the area, and we have to do a good job with that. I think sometimes we're a little bit lazy. I think we cover the easy part of the story and go out and catch the crime scene and the police tape, but we don't really go beyond that to see what it all means and look at those trends.
Why? Why do you think that is?
Because it's easy often. As a veteran of television news yourself, you know, sometimes you're just running to get everything covered that you can. You're trying to put together a newscast with limited resources, and so crime stories are easy. Those surface crime stories are easy. There's always a crime scene. There's always a cop that'll talk to you. There's probably a witness next door. You can shoot that crime tape. And so you can cover a lot of very simple but not very meaningful crime stories in one day. One reporter can get out scene to scene and do quite a bit of work and really not tell the viewers much at all about the crime problem.
So what should we be doing then?
We should go beyond the who got stabbed today story. Those have value in the news, and we probably need to put a little bit of time into that. But we should do, as your first guest talked about, look at these crime numbers. They're going down, 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 and those don't get covered. We tend to leave people with an impression, and there's a lot of research to this, that people who watch a lot of television news think that the crime problem is getting worse, and they expect that the world is a much more violent place than it is because what they see is out of context with what's really happening. So that context is what's often missing in news coverage, especially television news, and we don't do a good job of putting it with the story.
Has that evolved at all over the last, I don't know, couple of decades? You know, because there was a time, I think the general public knows the phrase, if it bleeds, it leads. That kind of made it its way into our general vernacular. But then at the same time, if you have a conversation with anyone talking about local news, they'll tell you they can't stand that crime coverage. Are newsrooms reflecting that, that attitude at all, do you see?
They are. It's, the public will tell you they don't want to watch that, and then they will sometimes. Although I would argue that the thinking viewers of television news are turned off by that constant coverage of meaningless crime, and that they've left television news in a lot of cities. They just don't think there's anything there for them, that the coverage doesn't tell them anything about how they live their lives, whether they're safe or not. And so I think we've lost viewers over the years as we've strived to gain them with this sort of coverage.
Is this a challenge when you're training the future leaders of a lot of newsrooms? What's your challenge to try to maybe adjust this trend a little bit?
I think the biggest challenge is we're a competitive business. If you watch one channel, that means you're not watching the others, and we live and die by the ratings on the commercial side. And so it's very hard to not go cover a story that your competitors are covering. And it's very hard to explain to your viewers why that is, although thanks to social media and the more two-way communications that we have with our viewers now, we can talk about that. We have a segment every week on our station where we answer their complaints and talk about why we covered something one way and sometimes why we didn't cover something at all. But it's tough. That's the hardest thing, is to resist that urge to run in the same direction as everyone else.
Of course, sometimes the news is just bad. Is there a responsibility to cover something? I mean, for those who wouldn't ever know, most newsrooms have a bank of police scanners that you can monitor, and I've heard stories of some newsrooms just shutting those off and saying, we're not doing that anymore. Is there a disservice to doing something that radical?
Yeah, that's probably irresponsible. How would you like to have done that on 9/11 and be the last to find out that that had happened? So, no, listening and frankly even rolling a crew to cover these things, I think there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes I'll be interested, a viewer will complain about how we're working a story, not what we reported. And I said, well, give us a chance to decide what we're going to put on the air and online. Don't complain until you see what we decide. We may decide this is not a story. We may cover it differently than you think we will. So, no, we have to be ready, and that's often a hard part of it. You commit some resources to a story that looks like it'll be a big deal, and I think the gutsy editor is the one who says, you know, we put half a day into that, but it's not a story. It's not worth covering, and that's tough because you still have 30 minutes to fill at 6 and 35 more at 10 and so on. So you've got to figure out how to put that all together.
Yeah, these are you're teaching, but not just in the classroom. You teach by working as the news director for several years in a newsroom. Are you thinking of times when you yourself had to make these kind of calls and kind of the give and take that you had to do as a boss?
Yeah, I really do. Luckily for me, that I do have to make decisions that show up on the newscast that we have each night, but we get to talk about it, and I think it might be one of the more reflective newsrooms because we try to grab a second here and a second there and teach as we make these decisions. So I think we've had a number of good editors here who've been able to say, hold it, let's put the brakes on and see if this is really where we want to go with this. And you know from your newsroom time that you put on the news at 6 o'clock and you stand there and you look at monitors where everybody's on at the same time and you look to see what the other guys did and what you did. And over the years, I'm not perfect, and I certainly have regretted a few decisions, but I think I've been happy with the vast majority of them, even if it means somebody else is on a story that we decide not to cover.
Stacey Wolfel, thanks for your time. Thanks for your education that you've shared with so many people, and congratulations, you're going to be working in a slightly longer format by heading up the University of Missouri's new new documentary program there.
That's right. That's right. Looking forward to that. Maybe we'll put one together on crime.
I like it very much. Thank you. Thanks for your time. Stacey Wolfel, University of Missouri, Columbia. Now let's turn to Margie Enright, who shows us one neighborhood here in the city of St. Louis working to clean up the crime.
When you walk the streets of Lafayette Square, chances are you'll notice thriving businesses, families on a stroll, and maybe even the abundance of man's best friend. But it's what you don't see that neighbors say makes a difference to this neighborhood.
As I say, it's the most community-involved neighborhood, I believe, in anywhere in St. Louis or St. Louis County.
But this bed and breakfast owner and longtime resident knows his neighborhood has a past.
A lot of people in Northside have never even been to Southside. They don't know that They'd look at Lafayette Square and think, oh, well, that's just more of a privileged neighborhood. But I also talked to officers who used to pull bodies out of the lake in the park. This was a very unsafe neighborhood. You avoid this neighborhood at all costs.
And he's seen some tough times firsthand.
Well, when we moved here, I wouldn't let my wife walk up the street by herself. Having a business which is a bed and breakfast and people are coming to stay, one of the first things they ask is, it safe?
Even as things steadily improved, others agreed. Any crime was bad for business.
So things had gotten, were kind of like rolling along and things were good. Then all of a sudden we were seeing this spike in, in crime happening, little crime, and then it just got to be more, it might be a car break-in or other things were happening, and we're like, we don't like this. We don't like this. What can we do about it?
Jeff Jensen and Matt Brazelton are the proud owners of 4 Muddy Paws, a local shop providing healthy pet products and grooming.
Yeah, we started about 10 years ago when we found a puppy on a camping trip and then realized that we didn't have anywhere to be able to find the healthy, nutritious foods, the fun toys, and just regular pet gear, unique pet gear that we really wanted for him. So we thought, well, why not just create our own destination?
For the dogs of Lafayette Square enjoying
absolutely,
their toys.
and beyond.
And beyond,
yep.
yeah.
Absolutely, and then we offer, our full-service grooming.
So the dogs come in and a lot of times they go straight here?
Yes, exactly, because they're like, hey, this is where I can do all my shopping. So.
And while business is good now, it took a lot of work to get here. A lot of work from a lot of people.
The communities don't get better if people don't step up and make them better. And so that's been the spirit, this entrepreneurial spirit of the community. And so it made sense, if we're going to venture off to be an entrepreneur, let's do it in a community that we can support and that will support us. That was our sort of synergy between our business and then living in our community.
And it was the residents partnering with the police and city officials that brought this neighborhood back. And that's really what I try to emphasize to other neighborhoods, is it really takes a community, it takes a village. And like other neighborhoods that had done in the past, Gravois Park, Dutchtown, Tower Grove, I got people to sign up to do mobile patrol. And a little bit different, I had contacted the police captain beforehand to get her buy-in, and we came up with guidelines of the road, so to speak, for residents if they were going to do this. And then that was the catalyst for starting everything else in the neighborhood ownership model.
It was in 2009 that the neighborhood adopted this model, empowering residents to take back their neighborhood by patrolling the streets, creating a local substation for police, and advocating for victims of crime in their neighborhood.
Last year before last, we had our lowest crime in over 10 years. Last year, we had, again, low crime.
Mike says most communities already have the tools to take back their neighborhood.
It's kind of like Christmas, where you have a present over there, a box over there, your ribbon over there, and your tree in the middle, and all you do is bring it all together and put it in a box and put a bow on it.
Your neighbors have to get together, they have to care, because this is hard, it's hard work to take it back. So you've got to have a passion, you've got to have a commitment to say, you know what, I love where I live, I love my neighbors, I love my home, I love this community, and I want to save it.
For Stay Tuned, I'm Margaret Enright.
So let's keep this conversation going on the neighborhood level right now. Quickly, I'll do introductions of who we've got at the table with us. Jim White, Executive Director of the Central West End Neighborhood Security Initiative. Rachel Smith, Chief Prosecutor of the Community Affairs Bureau in the Circuit Attorney's Office, and Antonio French, Alderman with the 21st Ward. Thank you all for being here. Antonio, I'll start with you because you've been pretty active on social media in the last week or so. We've heard a lot about crime being down. It's historically trending down. Does it feel that way when you talk to the people in your 21st Ward?
No, it doesn't feel that way. And the kind of crime that folks care about that really affects their quality of life is violent crime. And so I think that it is intellectually dishonest to try to play number games and say that total crime is down when homicide and shootings are up in double digits. So we've seen in the first quarter of this year in the city of St. Louis, homicides up by more than 20%. So it doesn't matter how much car break-ins are down or petty crimes. That's the kind of crime that really affects people's quality of life and perception of the city.
Same in your neighborhood. How are things going in terms of the perception when you talk to people in the Central West End?
The perception in the Central West End, I believe, is that over the years, the Central West End has gotten better, safer. And that's a result of a few programs that have helped us achieve that. We're fortunate to have a tax base that funds supplemental police patrols, several thousand of those a year, off-duty police officers riding bikes, which we think has a huge impact both on the perception and the reality of crime and keeping it from happening in the Central West End. Recently, we've started to add cameras as part of our approach to push down crime. We have them installed on a small scale, and they've worked in many instances to help provide the police good intelligence to help solve crimes, and that is really the importance of crime reduction, is identifying who's committing the crime and holding them accountable. And the third leg to that is court advocacy, getting involved as a neighborhood in the court process. I believe the police are arresting the right people, and those people are being properly charged by the Circuit Attorney's Office. And then it's our job as a neighborhood, as residents, to attend hearings when we can and let the judges know how that crime affects them as residents, and be there as a witness for the neighborhood to see that things get played out in an acceptable manner.
I want to talk more about that, the community's responsibility, but first I just want to ask you, Rachel, those are kind of two different views in the same city. I know you work in community,
right.
In the community. What are you seeing trend-wise? What are you seeing citywide-wise?
You know, I think sadly, a lot of the crime in the city is really a perception problem. Although I would agree with Alderman French. I mean, candidly, one murder's too many. And so when you have a community that really focuses on the fear and focuses on the number of homicides, that really lessens their response. And one of the things that I'm seeing across the city is that community, like in the Central West End and in O'Phalin and in Walnut Park. Tonight I was at a meeting in the Ville, one of the toughest neighborhoods in the city, where residents are saying, you know what, I'm tired of seeing these numbers. I'm tired of seeing young men shot and dead, and I'm going to do something about it. And I actually see those steps as really exciting. So the numbers trouble me that I hear with the homicides, and it frightens me. But you know what? We need to take those numbers and we need to take that information and let the people who I see every day hear it and act on it, because that's going to be the step we need to change crime in the city.
Can that really work?
Well, listen, I think what we have here is, you know, in a city like St. Louis, where your quality of life really depends on the neighborhood you live in. You have a completely different St. Louis experience depending on the side of town or the neighborhood you live in. And so probably about 1/3 of our population, about 100,000 people, live in neighborhoods where there were 0 homicides last year. And another third of our population lives in areas where there were over 100 homicides. And so the perception is completely different. And then you've got, for one side, the main problem related to crime is the city's perception of crime, the city's image. That is their chief concern, improving the image of the city. But for another section, the chief concern is actual violent crime. And so what we try to do is try to make our problem the whole city's problem to a certain extent. Is that people need to understand that we're all in this together. And if there are any neighborhoods in the city where people feel unsafe to let their children play out front, where they worry about hearing gunshots every single night, then even if you live in a safe neighborhood that is in the city of St. Louis, their problem is our problem. Because at the end of the year, on the pace we are right now, there's going to be over 100 murders in the city. And that affects us all.
Can something from Lafayette Square work in Fairground Park area?
Sure. The neighborhood ownership model is something that we've embraced in the Penrose and O'Fallon neighborhood with much success. But even the characteristics of a Penrose and O'Fallon neighborhood are different from the characteristics of, say, a College Hill neighborhood, which is right next door. The actual quality of life and demographics are different in those neighborhoods. What we have to do, I think, is recognize that it's not just isolated hot spots. And in fact, we've got entire areas of the city that are always hot, and they require more resources. And so that's the conversation that the chief and I have been having publicly and privately, is allocating more resources to those areas and really taking violent crime more seriously than other crime. I think a lot of what we hear from the chief is equating all crime. He probably says that crime in general is down, but all crime is not equal. And what I'm focused on is violent crime, homicides, and shootings.
So you're talking about these people who feel passionate, that want to do something about it. They're tired of this. Can that actually, do they have the power to really do something? What concrete thing can they really do?
There are so many things that they can do. They can first come forward when they know something. On the majority of the crimes that happen in the city, the people are not held accountable because we do not have the necessary witnesses and victims come forward.
No snitching.
And I wouldn't even say it's no snitching. I think people will call the police anonymously, but when it's time to actually come in and look at a lineup, or when it's time to come into court, they don't come in. And they don't realize that the power in the word of one person can change an entire case. There was recently a case where a 9-year-old, her family trusted the system. She was the eyewitness. She came forward on a murder case. That murderer went to prison for life. And that was on the word of a 9-year-old. And if there's one thing that people in this city, in this area, need to know, is that the word of one person can really turn a crime and turn the community around.
Antonio was talking about resources that Barnes Jewish has a stake in the Central West End. I know they've played a role in some of the cameras you're talking about. Is that, could you do what you're doing without a partner like that, for instance?
Well, they've been a very, WashU Medical Center, the whole complex, they've been a big partner in what we're trying to do, but the other fundings also come from the taxpayer, the tax base, and the Central West, parts of the Central West End are divided up into special taxing districts, and those districts have stepped up to also have a stake in this larger camera project that's going to be going on.
So do we all have a stake in, like Antonio's saying, all areas, or are we just going to fix one neighborhood at a time? Is it possible to do it any other way?
Well, I will argue that we need to focus on the areas, if our intention is really to drop the numbers of violent crimes, especially homicides, we should focus resources on those areas where we know those violent crimes mostly occur. And so, you know, I would ask a Barnes or a Washington University to take seriously what is occurring in some of our roughest neighborhoods in the city that may not be near their campuses. But when the New York Times has a front page story about the homicide rate in the city, that affects recruitment. That affects the ability of funders to get workers for new startups in the city.
So we should join the city and county and those would go away?
See, no, absolutely not. Because what the problem is with that is that what I'm focused on in making these blocks safer. There are other folks who are primarily focused on the perception. But, you know, merging city and county crime statistics won't make our neighborhoods safer any more than merging city and county test scores for schools will make our kids smarter.
I'll cut you off right there, and we'll save that because we got to bring you back, if you don't mind, for a roundtable at the end. I'll keep us on track. That was unfair that I set you up there, but it's a good tease for later in the show. Let's get back to social media. Get your voice back in the show. Welcome. We have a judge in the studio with us, Judge Brian Hettenbach, Circuit Judge, City of St. Louis. Thanks for being here with us. I think we just saw on Twitter someone actually asking, so what kind of crimes are actually going through the system and being prosecuted? What do you see overall going through our court system?
Well, I've spent about 4 years in a trial division where I had trials every day, tried well over 100 cases. My current assignment is I'm the felony docket controller in the city of St. Louis, so every felony case comes through my courtroom before it goes somewhere else. And I can tell you in the city, what we are overwhelmed with is what I call street crime. We don't have murders and robberies that are carefully planned and plotted like on TV. What we basically have is street crime. And by that I mean you have people that come often from depressed or distressed neighborhoods. And then it's the intersection of just poor social thinking, bad planning, and opportunity. So it may start at the very bottom, someone who has a drug problem, and they're going to take a lawnmower out of your garage, or they're going to take copper piping out of a building. It may go up a notch, and someone who has the opportunity to just take your cell phone off a table. And then it goes to the kinds of crimes that terrorize our neighborhoods, where someone has a gun and they're going to put that gun in your face, they're going to take your backpack or your car. And those people are doing things because they don't have the right social thinking, and they're not acting according to what consequences would be. And that happens over and over and over again.
What do you mean what do you mean when you say they have poor social thinking?
Well, by the time someone is in our court, they've already committed a crime. Most of the people I see are people, like I said before, who come from distressed neighborhoods, depressed neighborhoods, bad economic backgrounds. We see a lot of young men. It's not always men, but it's often from 17 to 22 years old. They've dropped out of school. They have no job. They have no source of support. They don't have any structure in their neighborhood. And so they don't think about the consequence of what they're doing. And if you give that person a gun, something like that, they're not looking ahead to what the consequence may be. And they'll shoot you not because they don't like you or because they're angry at you, but because it just becomes a crime of circumstance. Those crimes happen over and over and over again. We see them play out in our courtrooms every day.
So is there a fear of punishment, and is it deterring them at all?
You know, that's a hard thing to say. I think there is a fear of punishment once someone is in the system. But of course, anyone who is in our courtroom and is pleading guilty or is being found guilty of a crime on any given day, and whether we're sending them to prison or whether we're not sending them to prison, it's very, very hard to draw a connection between what's going on in that courtroom and someone who is really committing the same offense at that same time out in the community. That's not a connection that's very easy to draw. And the community component of where the criminals come from is a very difficult problem in the urban community.
I'm sure you see stories repeat themselves in front of your bench.
They do. We often say you can't make this up, and you can't.
So what do you wish that you could say to the community, much like I asked the chiefs, what kind of maybe power do you wish you had as a judge that you don't, to have a real impact on this problem?
Well, you know, we're not law enforcement in the court system. I don't have authority to arrest anyone. What we do in the court system, really, when you boil it all down, is it's our job to make sure the process runs fairly, and then in the end, we make decisions that others either cannot or will not make. And that's our role. So, you know, I've heard from the community folks here tonight, and I'd echo a lot of what they've said and what law enforcement has said and what the circuit attorney has said, that we welcome people into our courtroom. The court seems like a foreboding place. It seems bureaucratic. It seems difficult to deal with. But the fact is, I hear from crime victims every day. I've heard from the community organizers that you've had on this segment tonight. They've been in Mike Petitit's been in my courtroom many, many times. I haven't always done what he wants me to do, but I'm willing to tell them that to his face. When the communities come into our court, it serves two purposes, really. One is one that maybe they're not even thinking of. They're thinking that it's perhaps a show of force, and so that's influencing our decision, and maybe that is a factor at times. But the mere fact that they've organized to come into the courtroom, that process is a really important factor in fighting crime in their neighborhood. And then the second thing is, when they come into our courtroom, we're not just interested in hearing that they're concerned, but as a judge, you're often looking for what I call a moment of clarity in making a decision. And you listen and you listen and you listen. Sometimes that moment of clarity comes from a source that you didn't really see coming. I've had community people come in and, you know, I've got a report on a defendant, and I've got the police telling me one thing and a prosecutor and the defense counsel. But someone will come in and say, you know what, I know this guy is only charged with a low-level crime, but we see him every day down on the corner in my neighborhood. And several other people say, yeah, we see him too, and he's not committing a crime. But that gives us a little window, that clarity that sometimes we're looking for in making a decision.
Judge, stick around. We'd like you to be on our post show. Don't go anywhere. Thank you for your time. Judge Brian Hettenbach with the City of St. Louis. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, let's talk about crime and punishment a little bit more, and maybe some of the disparities we might see in sentencing. I want to introduce the table. Norm White, professor, St. Louis University, criminology and criminal justice. Welcome back to the show. Susan McGraw, law professor at St. Louis University School of Law. And Thomas Harvey, executive director, Arch City Defenders. So we just heard from the judge a little bit about looking kind of behind the curtain of how things go. Do the punishments fit the crime? Are the punishments doing any good?
I think there's a place for punishment, but I think there's also a real opportunity to affect a lasting change in a lot of the people who move through the criminal justice system. I think punishment's part of it, but I think that we need to start thinking about what else we can do, what else we can do to rehabilitate, how we can get people jobs, how we can keep them out of the system in the first place.
Arch City Defenders, you take on a lot of work for people who wouldn't have attorneys otherwise.
That's right. And what we see consistently is people who are punished disproportionately to their crime. They are low-level offenders who are punished by not being represented sometimes, by being assessed fines they can't afford, by the incarceration because they are unable to obtain an attorney, which leads to potentially losing their housing, losing a job if they had one, losing touch with their family while they're in there. There are serious consequences to a lot of these low-level crimes that sometimes are prosecuted as a result of some of the hotspot policing we talked about earlier on the show.
Well, we heard from Mr. French, the 21st Ward Alderman. He's very concerned. Do we not have to be tough on crime, as the saying goes?
I think we have to be tough, but we have to be reasoned about what we do. We're at a place where we've locked up over the last 20, 30 years an average of 2 million people a year. We have millions of people who have criminal histories. They can't get work. They return to communities that are not able to, where they're not functioning well to begin with. Those communities aren't prepared to reabsorb those ex-offenders, those people that are re-entering the community. When they don't succeed, then we wonder why they're not succeeding, but they're not able to work. They've been locked up in places that are so far away that they don't have any family ties, that they're not connected in that way, and it's inefficient at this point. A lot of the low-level or the minor offenders, not violent offenders, but drug offenders that got sent away and have accrued very long sentences, wind up with no way out at that point when they come back.
So when we say the word disparities, are we talking about race? Are we talking about economics? Are we talking about mental health?
All of it.
Yeah, let me give you an example. Our law school is right across from the park in the city near City Hall. And there are people who want to be on a TV show that's getting taped there this weekend. So they're all in tents on the grass of the park. Well, there are other people, our clients, who if they set up tents in that park and tried to stay there overnight would get arrested and charged with trespassing or loitering. That's the kind of disparity that we see, that I see, that you know, folks who are down on their luck and need to be in the city to access services are really subject to prosecution, while folks who might be getting baseball tickets or waiting for a TV show aren't.
Well, I think a lot of people would push back and say that those folks waiting for baseball tickets don't attack someone, push them down where they're trying to go past the Lucas Park area and things of that nature, too.
Well, neither do my clients, Casey. They're arrested on charges of trespass and other minor infractions. Not everybody who's homeless is violent.
Are we asking our police department to do more than they're resourced to do at this time? And I'm sure the judge would tell you that they're not underworked by any means either. Who's going to do this work that you're talking about to fix the system?
Well, not every action of a person needs to be a criminal offense. So being poor, being in poverty, having a mental health problem, having a substance abuse problem is not necessarily a crime. So what people need is treatment sometimes in these situations, not more police presence. And Alderman French said it very clearly. He's not talking about crime in general. He's talking more about violent crime. That's the crime that impacts his neighborhood. And last year in February of 2013, when there was a heavy police response to some violent attacks in College Hill, the result was 11 arrests of low-level offenders. not the people who committed those attacks, but people arrested on bench warrants, people arrested on driving while intoxicated, minor crimes that are not nonviolent crimes and not the focus of what the people are looking for a response to.
So what's working?
What's working? I think that there has to be a police presence. I believe truly, I was listening to former Chief Eisen talk about the hearts of the men and women that go out and are police officers. We all want to see something better. Those guys don't. I teach those students all the time. They're learning and they're preparing because they want to make good for the community. The challenge is that we have communities that are distressed. That what Alderman French is talking about is are communities in this city that are under-resourced, that have been left to rot, essentially. And when we look at the behaviors and the kinds of outcomes that we see there, those aren't new. When I was talking to the
Let me hold you right there.
I can't go there.
No. Yeah, I want to make sure you have the right space to go there. Because we got to just look at a couple more tweets while we bring the folks who we're talking about, like they're not here, back to the table so we can continue this honest conversation. So hold the thought. Don't lose it. We're going to see Twitter. Sorry. Okay, as we do each week, we have the post show that stays online after the show, but we like to start it on the show. So everyone's getting back around the table here. Thanks for sticking around. We're going to find one more chair. Here, Chief, go right ahead. There you go. Professor, finish your thought. I cut you off. You were saying.
What I was saying is that basically we have communities that are very distressed. We have communities where the pipeline to the kids standing on the street at 13, 15, 18 years old begins in the elementary schools where kids don't have any place to go after school to sleep, where they don't have food on the table at night. If you leave kids in those kinds of conditions, you're creating a climate where they don't see choices. They don't have choices. And work that I've done recently, they talk about it as being war zones. We're responding to the world we're in. We have to do something different. We need to do something dramatically different at this point if we want to stem the crime problem, other than bringing two geographic spaces together so we don't look as bad.
What's radical on the horizons that we should be doing? Do you find, was there value in those 11 arrests in College Hill to you?
There were more than 11 arrests. But one of the things that I find when I do go to neighborhood meetings, you're absolutely right. They're concerned about violence, but they're also concerned about quality of life issues. I'm a firm believer in the broken windows theory, that neighborhoods that show signs of deterioration, the criminal element feels comfortable to operate in those. So there is value in those low-level arrests, too, if you're trying to change what's been going on systemically in neighborhoods over time. And we need generational solutions. This isn't a 1 or 2 year solution. We need to be getting to the kids in 1st and 2nd and 3rd grade and giving them hope, giving them direction. And then finally, what I would say is we need outcomes that keep people safe. Could be incarceration, could be jobs, could be other things, but we need outcomes that keep people safe. And we, as a society, aren't very good at that right now.
Is that something that can the police departments get to kids at 1st and 2nd and 3rd grade level?
Well, we can, and we've been doing that for years. We've tried that through the DARE program. We tried to do the right thing. But I'll tell you this, the police department, the courts, they can't do it by themselves. If we don't have community engagement regarding this, then we're not going to ever be able to achieve what we want to achieve. We saw that with the Lafayette Park area, and we see that all over the place. When our communities become engaged with the police department, and when the police department is proactive in engaging those communities, we can make that positive difference, but that is the key.
And I agree with that, and I think one of the most frustrating things is that with the new local control we have in the city, one of the reasons I supported local control and was so excited about local control is that it would give us an opportunity to take a holistic approach to fighting crime. The police department can't do it by themselves, but we have an opportunity now to coordinate efforts between the police department, the Parks and Recreation Department, St. Louis Public Schools, the Health Department, and the Building Division to board up some of these buildings. I completely agree about the broken window theory too. You look at an area like College Hill and you see why there is so much violence and crime over there, because it looks like an abandoned part of town. And so we have an opportunity now. I don't think the city, I don't think the mayor has used that opportunity and sees that opportunity. And it may take the Board of Aldermen and the Public Safety Committee to push on that to make sure that happens, but that's the only way we're ultimately going to solve it.
Outcomes that keep, I'm sorry, Chief.
Well, I was going to say, I think I could say this now since I'm in a different role. As great as police departments are and police officers are, they can't be tasked with the role of dealing with poverty, dealing with unemployment, dealing with deteriorating neighborhoods. I think the police departments try to play their part in that role, but if a 3-year-old has a lack of education and is impoverished and their family doesn't have employment, that's not necessarily the role of the criminal justice system. And so we have to find another way to deal with those social issues in those neighborhoods before they come to the police officer, before they have to deal with them. And so I think the police department, they do a great job, but I don't know whether or not that is their specialty, right?
I think that, I mean, I would disagree in one way to say that it should be part of the criminal justice system. Maybe not be part of law enforcement, but we're part of the criminal justice system as well. And Sue and I's organizations connect people to social services as well. So it is part of trying to solve the underlying problems that the criminal justice system does play a part in that.
Oh, yeah.
A very important part, because the social service organizations aren't there in the courts. So it takes lawyers like Professor McGraw and other people in the community to make some of those connections, because the poor people we're talking about, they don't have the benefit of private treatment programs like some of the middle class and wealthier people do. They need to be connected to these social service organizations to address mental health problems, substance abuse problems, things that are really driving some of the crimes that we're talking about.
And I agree, they are a part of the solution.
Count that as a success, and in fact, that's how police get promoted very often, on the basis of the arrests they make, but it's also evidence of a failure. Some crime was committed and an arrest resulted. That crime could have been prevented, not simply by the police, but by the array of elements that we've all been talking about. The police have an important role to play in averting crime, preventing crime. And by preventing crime, then you don't have kids racking up huge arrest records, cementing criminal identities, and generating the kind of stigma and reduction in opportunity that is so tragic in this community and other communities. We don't want police simply making arrests. We want police to avert crime.
But I would push back on that a little bit, because again, if we're talking about violent crime, and especially homicides.
I am talking about violent crime.
Well, in violent crimes, you know, if you're living in a city where most murderers get away with murder, it is not a comfortable place to live in. If you live in College Hill neighborhood and you had a rash of violence last year and all of those murderers are still on the street, then that is not a place that you feel comfortable in. And so when it comes to violent crimes, convictions of actual murderers is important.
Of course.
It is absolutely important, but it's actually really unfair to put that at the step of law enforcement or even the criminal justice system. You know, in some respects, the criminal justice system is kind of like the crucible of problems. You know, society's problems come out and are displayed for all to see in the courtrooms and in front of the police officers. But in reality, what precipitated that murder, none of the people at this table had anything to do with. And so the issues really do come to, if we really want to take on crime, we have to do something well before it's a law enforcement issue. We have to do something in the schools. We have to do something to support families. We have to do something to support poverty. And to lay that at the doorstep of law enforcement is really unfair.
But I think what you're talking about is crime prevention, which I completely agree with. But after a crime occurs, it is up to the judicial system, it is up to
to the police department. It's up to the whole system to see that justice is done.
Except they
and when
can't-
justice is not done, that sends a very negative, damaging message to the community.
Alderman, the number one reason, across the board, and I can name you 3 murders in the last month where no one was held accountable, and it's because the people who know about it, saw about it, won't do anything about it.
And do you understand why?
We do understand why, but we need community leaders to encourage people to come forward. We need to work with the community so that they begin, despite the decades of history and the long trauma, we have to begin to trust that system and come forward. The reason the homicides in the city, and I agree with you, it's tragic. I had a brother killed. You know what? In the situation, those families deserve better. But the people who know about it and saw about it are really the ones who can do something about it.
The Chief Dawson said something that struck me, outcomes that keep people safe. And, you know, we're talking about all the things that happen prior to the offenders coming into the courts and the police custody. You know, from my simple perspective, we like to see violent offenders. Now, what we're talking about is violent crime, aggravated assaults with firearms. We like to see offenders get bonds that keep them in jail until their trial. We like to see those offenders that are charged and found guilty of violent crimes sent to the Missouri Department of Corrections to serve an extended sentence. But what we do see is the bonds and the sentences that are handed out, we see that they get undercut, it seems like, by the Missouri Department of Corrections when an offender is sentenced to 30 years in prison, and then after 15 years and 3 months, Missouri Department of Corrections, whatever their criteria is, determines, hey, this offender can be re-released back into society, and it completely undermines the circuit court, their decisions to impose a sentence, and the community is left trying to deal with somebody that's reintegrating back into society. And oftentimes we see that when someone reoffends, that, you know, had they served the remainder of their sentence or had some other intervention done while they were in the hands of Department of Corrections, perhaps that could have been done.
What do you think about that?
Well, it is a fact that when I sentence someone to 10 years, they often don't do 10 years. Now, we know that, and in fact, the defendants know that as well. And, you know, we factor that into sentencing. Sentencing is probably the hardest thing we do in criminal courts other than dealing with crimes with children. But that is true. People do, I'll send someone away to prison and they'll serve a few years, and once they leave our building, I don't have any authority over them anymore. Sometimes they ask me at a sentencing, you know, hey man, how much time am I actually going to do? And I tell them, well, when you leave this building, there'll be someone in the Department of Corrections who will make that calculation, but I'm not that person.
Well, but we are pushing people out. You know, the Department of Corrections has only so many beds. And if we want violent offenders to stay longer, then let's stop putting non-violent offenders, low-level drug offenders in the penitentiary. That's going to free up beds for violent offenders, and then they can stay there longer, and they can be off the street.
It's not true that the prison beds in Missouri are full of first-time nonviolent offenders. That is absolutely untrue.
And I didn't say that
said
they're
drug
full.
offenses.
Right. We said drug offenders. There are people in the Missouri Department of Corrections that have drug possession charges.
Absolutely, probably for their 6th or 7th time.
Well, and
Nobody
that's
in the
not
city-
necessarily true, because I've had people who were unable to be successful on probation, who have ended up in the Missouri Department of Corrections, and you have someone who's using a bed in the Department of Corrections on a possession charge, and at the same time, we're seeing serious offenders being released. We have to be smarter about how we treat people with, especially, I think, low-level drug offenses. They need to be treated with smarter. We need to be smarter about it. We need to find options for them that don't include tying up a penitentiary bed.
Chief, I'll go back to you just as we wrap things up here a little bit. How has your job changed from when you first were on the force to what you do now? And I'm thinking about a lot of what they're talking about here, some of the things that don't involve a set of cuffs.
we call it mission creep, that the job of law enforcement has spread into the social service arena so much now that we deal with people with mental health issues, we deal with people with homeless issues, substance abuse issues. And so we've really mission creeped out of just that prevention piece. And I don't remember who said it right, but if we have to arrest somebody, we actually have failed. Our goal is to try and keep that a crime from occurring. But we have to make sure that we're smart about it. And I hear your issue about the low-level drug offenders, except that those are the people that the neighborhoods are calling us about and are wreaking havoc in the neighborhood. So while I agree incarceration might not be the answer, we don't have any other options right now that seriously address those issues so we can have more room for violent offenders. And you're right, everybody at the table has to step up. The courts have to step up, the elected officials have to step up, you have to step up and do it, but that's how it's changed. We've mission creeped out so much that at 11:30 at night, when you need help, the only people that come are the police departments. There aren't defender prosecutors there aren't prosecutors. We're the only ones that are there. We fill a need in the social service program that we're not fully equipped to do, and we shouldn't be equipped to do.
Thank you all for your time. I think we'll leave it there. We've gone over our time as it is a little bit. Thank you all for being here. Very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.